All of these things are significant percentages of GDP. So that basically means our system is literally designed and incentivized to increase spending to higher and higher levels to grow the economy by default. 20% of the value of your currency is out of the window. Everything that you're used to buying is 20% more expensive at the ideal level. Honestly speaking, there's a lot of valid arguments that the number is significantly worse. So that inherently means that the value or the purchasing power of your dollar that you're saving is drowning by default intentionally. Believe it or not, there is a particular benchmark where saving money becomes counterproductive. It literally starts to become a bad financial decision. It's gonna sound crazy, it's gonna sound counterintuitive, but I want you to follow me through this conversation for a minute and just think about the context that I'm providing for you. We've been really focused on getting to $100,000 for those of us who aren't there yet in savings and investable assets. That benchmark is priority for two reasons. Number one, it creates a level of security that if you need to switch jobs, lose a job, your source of income becomes threatened, that $100,000 is a pretty good benchmark for most of us to stay afloat or survive if need be. The next reason is because $100,000 is the foundational point to where growth economically or financially in particular really catapults. When you get to $100,000, ideally in various investable assets, you get to a point where your returns are so much more significant. $7,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year in growth is very realistic. It's 7, 10, 15%, etc. So for those two reasons, $100,000 is an amazing benchmark. It's also the hardest number to get to. We've talked about it before. If this is a regular conversation you've been tuning into, you already know and you've heard it from other experts. $100,000 is the hardest because usually you're the most ignorant, the greenest, you're making the most mistakes, etc. It's a really difficult number to reach, but it's very rewarding once you get there. It is possible to get overzealous and save in a particular way to a financial detriment if you're not paying attention. When you save $100,000, if you pay attention to the majority of content and education around this topic, in most cases, nobody's referring to saving $100,000 in actual liquid cash. In most cases, everybody's combining that with cash, stocks. Some people even include real estate. If you go farther enough off to the drifts, you might even hear people talk about life insurance and precious metals. You do not really hear people talking about $100,000 in cash savings. There's a reason for that. It's a very important reason for that. As attractive as the idea may be to be able to log into your bank account and know that you have $100,000 sitting in a checking or savings account ready for disposal, ready for use, that you've worked your ass off to put up, it is absolutely financially detrimental to get to that point in most cases, depending on your particular scenario, your income and financial needs. It is a very bad idea, and I want to give you two baseline reasons why. Number one, our economic system, literally our GDP, gross domestic product, which is a metric for the economic growth or activity in our economy, is heavily influenced and calculated by the level of spend in the economy. Meaning that it's not really around what you might be thinking when you think about a metric for growth. You might be thinking more about, production and what's produced, wages growing, etc. A very significant portion of GDP is determined by spending, government spending, credit. All of these things are significant percentages of GDP. So that basically means our system is literally designed and incentivized to increase spending to higher and higher levels to grow the economy by default. This in itself, especially when you're spending from money that's created out of thin air, in many cases, that creates a scenario where you have an inherent deflationary value in your currency. So that means that the dollar, the $100,000 that you didn't save in cash, inherently has to become less valuable for the overall economy to continue to grow. That's the first problem. The second problem is tied very closely to the first problem is inflation is a necessary evil in our economy for one major reason of many is to make the debt that we've accumulated in this country as a country more affordable to pay back. When you have inflation in your currency and you're paying back a fixed debt, what ends up happening is you're able to basically pour in more dollars on the same payment, if that makes sense. So inflation is baked into our economic system intentionally. You hear the Federal Reserve, if you pay any attention, tell you that they want to get to a baseline of 2% a year annual inflation. That's considered great. That's ideal. That basically means in just 10 years, 20% of the value of your currency is out of the window. Everything that you're used to buying is 20% more expensive at the ideal level. Just in the last few years at the time of this recording, that number has been north of 5, north of 8, north of 9% per year on record. Honestly speaking, there's a lot of valid arguments that the number is significantly worse. So that inherently means that the value or the purchasing power of your dollar that you're saving is drowning by default intentionally based on our economic system. So when you start talking about saving $100,000 in liquid cash, I understand the psychology and the philosophy behind that. And if your financial situation warrants that, if that's a year's reserves for you and based on your income or expenses for you, then sure, go for it. Maybe that makes sense. But generally speaking, $100,000 is usually 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of expenses or living means for the average American. Most of us, by the time we do take-home pay, even if you make $100,000 a year on paper, taxes and deductions, you're probably walking away with 40 to 50% of that. So that basically means $100,000 can you 2 to 3 years if need be. And that's a great cushion. That's a great comfortable position to be in up until you find out you adjust that number for inflation. When you adjust that number for inflation, now you, as I just explained, even if it's the perfect 2% a year, you're down 20% in 10 years. That is a bad financial plan, a very bad financial plan. Unfortunately, I understand it goes against the grain of common sense, but unfortunately, that is what it is. You have to be careful how you go about reaching your $100,000 mark. And if you're beyond that, as I always say, if it's 250, 500,000, a million, or 10 million, whatever you're focusing on, you have to be careful how you go about saving it. I've already had conversations about the other side of this, where it's important to use the right financial assets or financial products to get to that 100,000 or beyond mark, because that product is what's going to be contributing to the growth of that savings. So, i.e., if it's in real estate, the equity growth, the mortgage pay down is creating that spread to get you to $100,000 in investable assets or a form of savings. Same thing in the stock market. It's that 7, 8, 9, 10, 12% return in the stock market is doing the work for you. The other side of that equation that we haven't really spoke on as much is that saving in cash is literally hustling backwards at a certain point. Yes, we all need some cash reserves for sure, but there's ways you can go about that, and there's a threshold at which that $100,000 or that savings rather will serve you. You will have to make a trade-off. You're gonna have to save 30, 50, maybe even $70,000 in cash to have the proper reserves that you need in your personal finances or your business finances if you're operating a business. And you're gonna take the inflationary loss on that. You maybe can throw it into some CDs and buffer that out, etc. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have to take loss because you need liquidity. You need access to that capital potentially at any given time. And so you're sacrificing the growth of that money or even the preservation of that money for access. But on the flip side of that, once you hit to a certain point, there's diminishing returns because you're beyond the point of needing liquidity. You got a year, 6 months, a year and a half. I mean, at the end of the day, there's only so much security in that you can have. So at a certain point, now you're hustling backwards because you're putting all of this work in to save this cash. You're putting it in a product that's earning next to nothing in interest. And the economic system is literally spending and borrowing us into oblivion. The only things that keep up with it are assets, real assets, stocks, bonds to some extent, real estate, crypto's kind of going into that conversation, precious metal, properly set up life insurance policies, fine arts if you want to go that far into it. There's only valuable, tangible assets that will continue to let that money grow. If it sits long enough, we'll continue to grow it, but we'll actually keep up or outpace the inflationary pressures, the increased spending going on in our economy. It's the only way it makes sense. And it's very important on this journey towards your 100K plus, 250 plus, whatever you're striving towards as you're listening to this conversation or having this conversation with me or listening to me rant. You have to understand that you have to go about that the right way or you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're going to waste a lot of time and you're going to end up in a scenario where what you were striving for, which at the beginning we talked about, security And earnings capability as far as growth is out of the window. It's in a product that's not gonna earn anything of any significance. We're in the best time for that in over 20 years and it's still not that attractive, 3 to 5%. And then you turn around and it's like the security part is out of the window because the inflation, it's not gonna buy you the same thing. It's not gonna be 6 months worth of supplies anymore in another 5 years because it's been 3, 4, 5, 6% inflation every year. So it's no longer gonna buy you the things you're used to having in your life at the, same capacity that it did when you started the financial savings plan. So I hope this makes sense for you because it is very important as I continue to put out conversations and content around that 100K mark and beyond. This is very important for you to understand. Coming from somebody in banking and financial services and somebody who has worked their own financial plan to get over that 100,000 mark in savings and investable assets. You have to be cognizant about how you go about it. Our financial system is not changing anytime soon around the spending, the debt levels, the borrowing, the inflation. All of that is gonna be here to stay. It's been getting worse every year. So don't trash your efforts. Don't waste all of this hard-earned energy, effort, discipline, diligence, sacrifice because you just don't have a financial understanding or an economic understanding of how money really works. You cannot save your way to financial prosperity in this system. It's just not designed that way. Robert Kiyosaki, one of his favorite terms, savers get punished. And it's the God's honest truth for the most part in majority of economic cycles. Savers get punished. You get the ass end of the deal. So comment down below. Let me know where you are with your journey with savings. Let me know what you are with $100,000 and beyond. And comment down below and let me know what vehicles or financial products or tools are you using to get yourself there. Please take this conversation, this context and information and apply it and integrate it into your situation so you can save yourself a lot of frustration, disappointment, and economic loss, financial loss. To all my pioneers, welcome back. To my new viewers, welcome in. As always, I want each and every one of you to stay focused, stay in motion. I'll see y'all soon. This is my blueprint for financial empowerment and self-sufficiency. This is my blueprint for optimal health and body mastery. This is my blueprint for mental, physical, and spiritual momentum. This is my blueprint for prosperity.